Welcome to the Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Ancient wisdom, modern life, and the way. Visit us online at taoananda.com or find us on all the socials. Now, the Modern Taoist.
Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Modern Taoist. My name is Kit Man, and I would appreciate it if you would like or subscribe or heart or smiley face or whatever you have to do on whatever platform you are listening to this podcast. We've already had our normal podcast episode drop for this week, and this is kind of a bonus episode. And I think we'll probably do this once every month or so, or maybe every 6 weeks. We'll have a bonus episode that's kind of an Ask Me Anything kind of episode. And usually the podcast episodes that I choose are things that I've been turning over in my head for a while. Sometimes it's something from a Tao Te Ching verse. Sometimes it's something that's happened in my own day-to-day life that feels worth exploring. But sometimes, in the case of today, it is brought on by a question that someone has asked. And we've gotten enough questions in the last couple of weeks that I said, you know what, some of these don't necessarily generate enough chat for them to be their own episode. So some of them are kind of interesting questions. Some of them might be what you would consider a little weird to ask, but I don't consider that, because my goal in doing this podcast is to not only inspire you or help you to learn more about Taoism and the way of the philosophy of Taoism, but to also educate on certain aspects that maybe because I have had this in my life for such a long time that I don't think about anymore. And questions that a beginner might have, that if you had a Taoist teacher near you, you could ask this and they would give you a roundabout Taoist teacher answer, because we sometimes do that. But I want to try to give you straight answers about some of these questions. And I'll be honest with you, sometimes when you put out a call for questions, the inbox fills up really fast, and other times not so much. And that's perfectly fine. Taoism is about working with what is, not forcing what we think should be. So the questions that do show up sometimes are ones that matter in that moment for that person. That shows us where the curiosity lives. It shows us where people are trying to connect Taoism to their own lives. And that's the beautiful thing about Taoist practice. It's, as we've discussed multiple times, it's not locked away in some ancient book or accessible only through meeting a monk. It's alive in the very questions that you and I ask each other on a day-to-day basis. Questions like, what does the Taoist actually do every day? How do you practice when you live where nature feels far away? Stuff like that. And some philosophy questions and some real human practical questions. These are where the Tao comes alive. This is where you can get a little information that you may not be able to find elsewhere. And sometimes you get the big questions, and we're going to answer one of those today because I found it really interesting that it's one of the questions I've gotten multiple times. So in this episode, that's what we're trying to do. We're going to sit down with the questions. I've picked out six that we're going to go through. Some of these are big questions. Some of them are small, interesting little questions. And we're going to see how Taoist practice, philosophy, and lived experience respond to them. And some answers are going to be simple and practical, and others are going to be a little more open-ended, I would imagine, because Taoism doesn't claim to have airtight conclusions for every mystery of life. Instead, Taoism just gives us a way to walk with the questions that we have and the best answer available to us. So my hope is that whether or not you asked one of these questions, you'll hear yourself in them. You'll hear your own curiosity echoed back, and maybe it will spark you to have a question. Or maybe it will spark you with an answer that you'll carry with you after this episode ends. So let's dive right in, and let's just get to the first one. Like I said, I took probably 10 questions, and I picked out 5 or 6 that we'll get at here. So we'll just jump right here to the first one. It's from Emily in Wasco. Is that Washington State? What does a simple daily Taoist practice actually look like for a beginner? Now, first of all, I love this question because it cuts straight to the heart of what we're trying to do here. People hear the word practice and they often think of, temples and incense and sitting in meditation for hours at a time. And those things exist. They do, but they aren't the only way. And they aren't even really the main way that most of us live or try to live in Taoism. For beginners especially, Taoist practice is about weaving simplicity into everyday life. So when you ask, what does it look like for a beginner to start? Let me just kind of start through your day for you. At the beginning of your day, and this is just my suggestions. You might find other ways, but you asked the question. So here you go. At the beginning of your day, I would suggest, before you check your phone, before you get pulled into the demands of your family or work or errands, pause. Take 3 slow breaths. Nothing forced, nothing exaggerated, just 3 easy, deliberate breaths where your mind follows the air coming in and out. When I say take a breath, I don't mean just take the breath. I mean take the breath and focus on it. Listen to the way it exits your body. Listen to the way it comes in. Feel the breath. That's Taoist practice right there. And it sounds almost too simple. I get that. But what that does is it resets you, or rather, it sets you for the day. It places you in rhythm of the Tao before the rest of the world has a chance to push and pull at you. So the next thing I would say would be think about movement. Taoists don't separate the body from the spirit. They move together. So maybe step outside and take a short walk. No earbuds, no scrolling, leave your phone behind. Even just around the block, even down to the end of the block and back. And begin to notice. Notice the sound of your feet on the ground. The way the air feels on your skin. Notice the trees or the clouds in your field of vision. That is walking meditation. You don't need a forest. You don't need a long, foggy path up a mountain. Your sidewalk works just fine. The point isn't where you walk, it's how you walk. Don't walk with a purpose of exercise. Don't walk with a purpose of destination. Walk with a purpose of noticing. Another piece of practice for a beginner is paying attention to transitions. Starting with a meal, take 1 breath before your first bite. Notice your transition from being, doing one thing to your nutrition. Take a deep breath before that first bite. Are you driving to work? Notice when you grip the steering wheel. Pay attention to how tightly you're gripping, and then loosen up. At the end of your day, step outside before you go to bed. Don't leave the television and go straight to bed. Even for just 30 seconds, step outside. Look at the nighttime sky. Taoism is inviting you at all times to see these in-between spaces. These are places of practice. These are not wasted times. Some beginners ask if they should journal. I brought it up before. I always say if it helps, do it. Taoist journaling doesn't have to be pages of analysis. It can be as simple as writing down one observation from the day. I noticed the way the wind shook the leaves. I felt calm when I paused before answering emails. I got frustrated in traffic, but I remembered to breathe. Remember, Taoism isn't about being perfect. It's not about not getting frustrated in traffic. It's about remembering to notice when you are and detaching from it. That is practice. Small observations. Journaling practice, same thing. Small observations, not big essays. And then we get to the matter of stillness. Now, we've talked many times, heck, we have a t-shirt in our little store that's about stillness. Taoists are stillness addicts. But again, we're not talking about sitting like a statue for hours, okay? For a beginner, 5 minutes of sitting quietly is plenty. Even for a seasoned practitioner, 5 minutes is fine. Sit and breathe. Let your thoughts come and go without chasing things. If you feel restless, that's fine. That's part of the process. Taoist stillness isn't about forcing silence. It's about being present with whatever happens to show up. Now, here's what I want to really emphasize, though, for a beginner. Taoist practice isn't about building an impressive routine that you can talk to everybody about. It's not about discipline for discipline's sake. It's about being present. If you manage only 3 breaths in the morning and nothing else, you're still practicing. If you forget one day, Taoism doesn't scold you. It invites you back the next day, or the next moment, or a week from now. If you're going along in your life and you've been listening to this podcast and all of a sudden you haven't listened in 4 or 5 weeks and you haven't been practicing, and if you stop and notice, oh my gosh, I haven't listened to that podcast. I haven't been practicing Taoism. Yet you just did. The noticing is the practice. Stopping to see what's going on is the number one thing that you can learn as a beginner. Emily's question is important because it reminds us not to overcomplicate this. Taoist practice, especially for beginners, is not about rituals and piled upon rituals. It's about awareness, breath, movement, stillness, and simplicity. Those 5 pieces, if you carry them lightly, are enough to change how you experience the world. Taoist practice is not meant to take you out of life. It's meant to take you deeper into life. You don't need a monastery. You don't need a monk. You need your own breath, your own steps, and your own presence. And that's it. So if you're wondering how to begin, start small. Breathe, walk, notice, sit. That's enough. And when you practice in these simple ways, you'll start to notice something else. You'll notice that the Tao isn't just about your practice time. It will begin to show up in how you talk to people, how you handle stress, how you move through your day. You won't even do it on purpose after a while. And that is going to lead us directly into our next question, because it's one thing to find Tao in quiet places, but what happens if you live in a place where quiet is hard to come by? And our question comes to us from Marcus, who asks, what is the role of nature in Taoism if you live in a city surrounded by steel and concrete? This is a question Taoist teachers hear a lot, because Taoism and nature are inseparable. When people picture Taoist practice, they imagine mountains, rivers, and bamboo forests, temples up on cliffs. And those settings are powerful, and they are definitely a part of the beginnings of Taoism. But Taoism isn't limited to those kind of postcard landscapes, because the Tao is not only found in the wilderness, it's present in the city as well. And here's the key idea. Taoism, Marcus, is about recognizing the patterns of life, the rhythms of flow. And those patterns don't disappear just because you are surrounded by sidewalks or big buildings. They may be harder to notice, but they're still there. Notice that same wind that bends pine trees up in the mountains is the same one that rushes down the city street. The same sunrise that lights up mountain peaks is also the same sun that's reflecting off the glass of those buildings. The Tao hasn't gone anywhere. You just need to adjust your way of seeing it. So, how do you connect with nature when you're surrounded by pavement? Start with what's available. A single tree on a corner can be your teacher. Watch how the leaves turn toward the sun. Watch how it shifts in the wind. How the roots crack the sidewalk. That one tree holds the entire Tao within it. Don't have a tree? Fine. Look at the weeds pushing through the cracks of the sidewalk. People ignore them or even, get annoyed at them. But Taoism teaches us to see strength in what persists. Weeds are the ultimate Taoist. And they really are. They'll grow wherever they feel like it. You can poison them and try to kill them. They'll come back. Eventually they do. Maybe not in the time that you're there, but they'll be back. Those small little green shoots are living reminders of balance and resilience. Okay? Maybe you live in a place, okay, you don't have any plants at all. No weeds, no trees, but you do have the sky. Clouds are going to move whether you're in a forest or on a freeway. The rain doesn't care if it falls on soil or asphalt. So one practice I recommend for city dwellers is what I'm going to call pocket nature. Carry a small connection with you. A stone or a shell, something from the natural world that you can keep in your pocket and touch throughout the day. And when you touch it, whether on purpose or accidentally, notice. Because that's your reminder that you are not cut out from nature, or cut off, rather, from nature. You are carrying it with you. Houseplants, they can shift the energy of your whole apartment. It's not about collecting dozens of them. It could just be a simple pot of herbs that you water in the morning. Taoism values that small ritual of connection to nature, especially if you take the time to notice the plant, breathe with it, give yourself 1 minute of being with the plant. And don't forget about your own body, because you are nature. Notice your breath. Notice your heartbeat. Notice your warmth, your movement. The Tao doesn't just live out there, it lives inside you. When you stretch, when you breathe, when you slow down your pace, you are practicing Taoist nature, even if there's a bus honking in the street. What Marcus's question really gets at is this. We often believe nature is out there somewhere, that you have to travel to in order to touch. But Taoism doesn't do that. Nature is wherever you are, because you are nature. And the Tao is wherever you are. The role of nature in Taoist practice is not about escaping the city. It's about seeing the Tao in places you already stand. So Marcus, if you're listening, the role of nature in Taoism is the same whether you're standing in a meadow or waiting at a crosswalk. Nature shows you flow and change and balance. What is the word we always say? Notice. You just have to be willing to notice. And noticing is going to lead us to our third question. Because once you see patterns and rhythms around you, you can't help but wonder, are these patterns random or are they pointing me someplace specific? So we're going to get a little deeper now in our next question. Sarah from Reno says, do Taoists believe in destiny Or is life completely up to chance? And this is such a good question because it points straight to a tension that almost everybody feels. This tension almost everybody feels at some point. Am I steering this life, or is something steering me? Now, in Taoism, the word often used here in this case is Ming. Roughly translated, it means destiny or your life mandate. But before we jump into mystical ideas, let's be very, very clear. Taoist destiny isn't about a fixed script that has been written before you were born. It's not a cosmic instruction manual telling you who you're going to marry and what kind of job you'll have and how every detail will unfold. It is far subtler than that. And I use a river a lot, but it really matters here. Think of a river. The river has a source, whether it's snowmelt or rain or a high lake. It has a source. And it has a general direction that it is moving. And it will eventually, whether as a roaring waterfall or a trickle, it eventually empties into the sea. That is the river's destiny. To leave its source, move in a specific direction, and empty into the ocean. That's the destiny. Aha! But how it gets there, the twists, the bends, the little side streams, that part is alive and changing all the time. Rocks fall in the way, floods come and reshape the bank, droughts come and slow the current, and yet eventually that water makes it to the sea. Taoism and Taoists look at our lives in a very similar way. There is a large current, something natural that pulls us along. That is our Ming. But inside that current, we have a choice. We can swim with the flow, or we can thrash against it. We can notice the bends and adjust, or we can bang our head on every freaking rock on the way down. The river is destiny. The way we move in it is choice. So no, Taoism doesn't say life is all chance and pure randomness, but it also doesn't say life is fully predetermined like some kind of locked-in fate. It's both. It's structure. There is a pattern. There is flow. But inside that flow is freedom. When you accept that, something shifts. You stop trying to control every detail because you realize that's not possible. But you also stop surrendering into hopelessness because you realize you do have a say in how you move. You have choices to make that can decide whether you're going to be in the flow or fight against it. And Taoist practice is about finding the balance between the two truths of destiny and choice. You can live with clarity rather than confusion. Let's make it practical. Have you ever had the experience where you pushed and pushed for something, and no matter what you did, it just didn't work out? Well, that's usually a sign that you were thrashing against the current. On the other hand, think of times when doors seemed to open for you easily, when the right person or the opportunity appeared at the right time. That doesn't mean you did nothing. It means you were aligned with the flow. Taoist practice teaches us to sense that difference through breathing, walking meditation, stillness. Quiet down enough to notice when you're forcing. That awareness is how you learn to live with your Ming. You understand? So I hope that answers your question. But this brings up an even bigger question. If Taoism talks about destiny, if it talks about a current pulling us along, then what happens when that current ends? What happens to the water of the river when it reaches the sea? That leads us to Jason's question. Jason from Anaheim touches the mystery that we all wonder about. He asks, what does Taoism say about the afterlife? This is one of those questions that virtually every philosopher, theologist, priest, pope, street corner reverend gets asked. It's a question that cuts to the heart of human existence. Every one of us wonders, in our own way, at some point in our life, we think about it. What happens when we die? Do we go somewhere? Do we continue on? Or is it just nothing? And Taoism doesn't answer this question with a single doctrine carved in stone. That's one of the big differences between Taoism and many Western religions. Instead of offering a clear-cut picture of streets of gold and eternal rewards or a hellish punishment, Taoism invites us to look at death as the sea, as part of the larger cycle. The water, when it hits the sea, when the river hits the sea, it's still there. It's just not a river anymore. At its core, Taoism teaches us that life and death are two movements of the same Tao. Think of breathing. Inhale, exhale. Think of seasons. Spring, summer, autumn, winter. Life and death are like that. Part of a rhythm. Not two separate realities at war with each other. When we die, Taoism says we return to the Tao. Just like a drop of water eventually finds its way back to the ocean. The individual self dissolves into the larger flow. The body returns to the earth. The breath returns to the air. The energy returns to the Tao. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is lost. It simply transforms. Now, this doesn't mean Taoists deny grief or that we don't feel the sharp pain of losing someone we love. Quite the opposite. Taoism allows us to feel fully without getting trapped into the idea that death is an ending. It is simply a change of form. A river has emptied into the ocean. The water is still there. It's just no longer a river. Some Taoist traditions and folk practices and Taoism, religious Taoists do talk about spirits and ancestors and realms of the dead. And you'll find rituals of honoring those who have passed, burning incense, leaving offerings. But these things are not about clinging to the past. They're about recognizing continuity, about keeping connection alive in a way that respects the transformation. There is nothing wrong with having happy memories of someone who has transformed, who has gone on. Where people find no relief in their grief is when they have decided that that person has just ended, that they are gone forever. Philosophical Taoism tends to speak more poetically, written about death and humor. A famous story about a man, when his wife died, his friends expected him to weep endlessly. Instead, after a little bit of mourning, he was found drumming on a pot and singing. And when he was asked why, he said, "She simply changed states, once without life, then alive, and now transformed again." Because to cling to one state forever would be out of harmony with the Tao. So it doesn't mean you shouldn't cry, or that loss doesn't cut deep. It means Taoism gives us a different frame. Instead of asking what's next, in terms of geography, where are we going to be? Heaven, hell, paradise. It asks us to see a bigger pattern of transformation. We don't vanish. We don't travel to a foreign land. We return to the source in the way that all things return. For some people, this perspective feels freeing. It removes the fear of judgment and punishment, releases the need to cling to certainty. And I recognize that for some people that can feel unsettling because it doesn't offer you a neat answer. There's no clear roadmap to the afterlife. Taoism lives in that tension. It says you don't need to know the full shape of what next. You need to live fully in what's here. So to answer your question, Jason, what does Taoism say about the afterlife? Well, it says that death is not the opposite of life. It is a partner. You and I are part of a cycle too vast for me to explain with words. But it's not too vast to trust. It says that the Tao carries us in birth, in living, and in dying. The same way the river carries a leaf to the ocean. Maybe the real Taoist response is this: don't spend all your energy trying to solve the mystery of death. Use that energy to live now, fully, in harmony with the Tao, so that when death does come, that it doesn't feel like a thief and more like a natural step in the rhythm of things. So let's move on to our next question. From the mystery of death, let's move on to something a little more grounded. This comes from Emil from Syracuse. Do Taoists fast for any reason? This question's interesting because my wife and I have been talking about fasting quite a bit lately. And the short answer is yes, but not in the way most people think about fasting. So when a lot of us hear the word fasting, we imagine something punishing. Going without food as a way to prove devotion or show discipline. In some traditions, fasting has been tied to guilt or purification. Taoism approaches it very differently. For Taoists, fasting is not about that. It's about realigning. Historically, Taoist fasting practices go back thousands of years. One very well-known form is called biju, which translates into avoiding grains. Taoist monks and practitioners believe that avoiding heavy foods like grains, which for them 3,000 years ago, grains were very heavy, avoiding them could lighten the body, extend your life, and open about more space for spiritual clarity. Now, whether that literally extends life is up for debate, right? Because we just talked about the fact that life is going to end when the flow ends, or when that part of the flow goes into the sea, into the next stage. But the point wasn't about chasing immortality. It was about using food or the lack of food as a tool to rebalance your system. If your body felt sluggish, if your mind felt cloudy, stepping back from food for a period was seen as a way to let natural systems of the body rest and realign. Think of it like giving your digestion and your breath and your energy a chance to just pause and catch up. So in modern life, fasting doesn't have to mean retreating and giving up food forever or even for days at a time. It could be much, much simpler. For some Taoist practitioners, fasting looks like simply skipping a meal when your body feels heavy, or simply taking a day to eat only light, fresh fruits and vegetables, or maybe only drinking tea and eating an apple. For others, it might mean practicing mindful eating, slowing down, chewing fully, not eating until you're hungry. Forget about, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. What if you're not hungry for lunch? Don't eat it. Here's the difference between Taoist fasting and the kind of diets you see trending on social media. Taoist fasting is never about force. It's not about punishing yourself for being bad. You ate too much sugar, so now you're not going to have anything. It's about listening. If you're exhausted, if you're stressed, if your body is screaming for nourishment, forcing yourself into a fast is out of harmony. But if you're bloated and restless, distracted, taking a short break from food may actually bring you back into balance. One Taoist teaching says, when the stomach is light, the spirit is bright. And there's some truth to that. We all know the difference between how we feel after a heavy, greasy meal compared to how we feel after something clean and simple, right? Taoist fasting is about learning and understanding and leaning into that awareness and making choices that support clarity. Fasting isn't just about food either. It's about seeing fasting of the heart as equally important, stepping away from constant stimulation, noise and arguments, the kind of things that clutter your mind. Fasting in Taoism is just as much about energy as it is about calories. Hell, sometimes the best fast is about putting your phone down for a day. So Emil, yes, Taoists do fast, but it is not as a test of willpower. It's a practice of returning to the body and to the mind and to simplicity and to balance and harmony. And it's personal. What works for somebody may not work for another one. Taoism isn't about a strict rule book. It's asking you to take time to listen to your body and respond. Now, if you're curious to try, I'd say start gently. Try ending your eating earlier in the evening so that your body has 3 or 4 extra hours to rest overnight. Try a day of only having some tea and maybe an apple or 2. Notice how your body responds. Notice how this mirrors something bigger. Taoism often talks in terms of light and heavy, right? Full and empty, yin and yang. Eating and fasting are part of that balance too. One is not better than the other. They depend on each other. And then that'll lead us to question 6. And this comes to us from Cammie in Springfield. Now, I don't know which Springfield this is. There's 19 Springfields in America, so I'm not sure if it's Springfield, Oregon, or Missouri, or Illinois, or Springfield from The Simpsons. I don't know. But Cammie wants to know a very simple history question. You think it's simple? Who invented the yin-yang symbol, and why do so many different religions use it? So we're going to end on a little history lesson here, because that's a great question. I'm sure many, many people have probably seen the yin-yang and gone, I wonder where that came from. It might be the most recognizable spiritual image in the world. And it's definitely the most recognizable Taoist image in the world. But that image has a much older story. And the answer isn't that one person invented it. The idea of yin and yang goes back at least, and I say at least in a very, very literal sense, at least, because we're not exactly 100% sure. It goes back at least 3,000 years. You can find early mentions in the I Ching, which is the Book of Change. That's one of the oldest Chinese classics. It describes the universe in terms of shifting opposites, dark and light, receptive and active, earth and sky. Ancient Chinese philosophers noticed that the world seemed to work in pairs, not as enemies, but as complements. Night would follow day, winter follows summer, stillness follows motion. These they called these forces yin and yang. And now the black and white circle that most people that we call the yin yang is actually called the Taiji Tu. The Taiji means the great ultimate, and Tu means diagram. So that symbol that we call the yin yang in the Western marketing circles, I guess, is actually Taiji Tu. And it means the great ultimate diagram. Diagram of the great ultimate. And early versions of that symbol began appearing around the Song dynasty about 1,000 years ago. Before that, yin and yang were explained in words, in symbols, and in calligraphy, and in broken and unbroken lines of the I Ching, but not in this particular circular diagram. That's about 1,000 years old. So the idea of the yin yang is much older. But the Taiji Tu, the actual symbol, is about 1,000 years old. So if you look closely at the Taiji Tu, you'll notice a few things. The black half is yin. If a lot of people don't know, I'll just tell you, the black half is yin. It's associated with the moon, darkness, stillness, the receptive, and most people get this mixed up. The black half is associated with the feminine. Most people think it's the other way around, that the masculine is the black half. The black half is the feminine. The white half is yang, associated with sun and brightness and activity and the expressive and the masculine. And each side of this, of course, has a dot in the middle that's the opposite color. That's the part people often overlook, but it's the crucial part of the Taiji Tu. It shows that the yin-yang are not absolute. There's a little yin inside your yang, a little yang inside your yin. Every midnight carries the seed of dawn. Every noon has the seed of dusk. Every man has a feminine side. Every woman has a masculine side. And that curved line between them shows motion. Yin flowing into yang, yang flowing into yin, nothing staying fixed. So, who invented it? No single person. It grew out of centuries of Taoist observation and philosophy. The Taiji Tu is less of an invention than a picture of what people already saw happening around them. Okay? And as for why so many different religions and philosophies use it, it's because balance is universal. Every culture has wrestled with the idea of opposites. The yin-yang just happens to be one of the clearest, most elegant ways to picture it. That's why you find it in Taoism and in Chinese Buddhism and in Confucian. When Confucius discusses harmony, it's in martial arts like Tai Chi Chuan, and has even been adopted into Western spirituality. And yes, unfortunately, sometimes that symbol gets commercialized. Tattoos, t-shirts, jewelry. But Taoism doesn't really mind. The yin-yang isn't a trademark. It's meant to point to reality. The yin-yang isn't any more a trademark than if you sat down and draw a picture of the sun. It's the same thing. Whether someone understands it deeply or wears it without thinking, the truth it reflects doesn't change. Life is balance, flow, and interdependence. The real invitation is to let the yin-yang become more than an image. Let it be a mirror. When you see it, remember that your struggles carry the seed of relief. Joy doesn't last forever, but neither does sorrow. Remember that to inhale, you're going to have to exhale. When you put forth a lot of effort, you're going to need to rest. Taoist practice invites you to stop clinging to one side and stop fearing the other. So, Cami, no single person invented the yin-yang, and no single religion owns it. It arose from wisdom and spread because the truth is simply universal. The Tai Chi Tu is not a relic, it's a living symbol. Every time you look at it, it asks you to live with more balance, more flow, more trust in that cool little dance between the opposites. And maybe that's the perfect way to close today's Ask Me Anything episode. All of today's questions about practice and nature and destiny and death, they all circle back to Cami's question. The yin and yang, turning endlessly, each shaping the other. That's Taoism. And that brings me to the end of this Ask Me Anything episode on the Modern Taoist. And I tell you what, I liked this a lot. Sometimes when I sit down to record, I come up with a specific theme in mind, a verse from the Tao Te Ching, something I've been turning over in my head for weeks. And those episodes are focused, almost like building a bridge across a river. But this is cool. I like this. It's got a different energy. It's less about me teaching from a plan and more about listening to what's alive in your questions. And that's important because Taoism was never meant to be sealed away, not reserved for teachers and scholars. It's living. Something has to breathe. And these questions are how we keep it breathing. Each question is like a doorway into a new part of the Tao that we may not have noticed before. This time, some of the questions were beautifully practical. How do you practice? Some of those questions were about everyday life. Some were mysterious things about destiny and what happens after we die. What I noticed in moving through them, though, was a rhythm. If you notice, we began grounded in a simple practice, and that stretched out to the environment and upwards into questions of fate and death, and finally back to the symbol of the Tao. So here's what I'd like to do moving forward. Let's make this a regular thing. Not every week, not every episode, but every now and then. Because Taoism isn't just about philosophy, it's also about education. It's not only about me sharing, but it's about everybody learning together. When you send questions, you're shaping the path of the show. That, my friends, is Taoism in action. So if you do get a chance to send one in, consider this your invitation to do so. Ask a simple thing, ask a strange thing, ask the questions that feel too obvious, or ask the ones that feel too complicated. Every one of them has value, and you might open the door for someone else. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for walking the path with me. And if you found something valuable in this conversation, I'd invite you to subscribe to the Modern Taoist on your favorite platform. Share these episodes with a friend who might be curious. Leave a review if you can. It helps others find their way here. And of course, you can always find links to everything, including our YouTube channel and the Tao Ananda store and more at taoananda.com or taoananda.org. So until next time, take a breath, notice the balance around you, and carry one good question into your day. The Tao has a way of answering back.
Thanks for listening to The Modern Taoist with Kit Man. Visit us online at taoananda.com or find us on all the socials. Please like or subscribe on this platform. And thanks again.